Hi everyone, my name is Apuraj Garikapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Apai. Imu has finally defeated Luffy, and by doing so he has unleashed his ultimate blade. The sword of the king of the world, the Bohu, but the sword's name contains such a complicated name that you may not have realized is actually a reference to one of the passages of the Harley. So let's break down these past few chapters together. We continue where we left off in the large chamber of the palace. Given what we see in this chapter, it would appear this is the throne, as later shots show a large throne which is likely the seat of power of the kingdom. A piano can also be observed in the room, which is befitting of a Spedia status as a musical kingdom. We haven't got much detail on the birdie figure, but once again we can assume that it is Mars. Much like we saw with Gunko earlier in the arc in Saturn in God Valley, Imu's silhouette pops out from Mars's body. Interestingly, we've only seen Imu doing this with either the Gunko, and since we know Gunko is special to having perennial youth, I wonder if Imu can only do full body possessions with those he has the highest tier of covenant with. We did see him manipulating Harold, but it's probably he was manipulating his personality as he described rather than taking over his body. Interestingly, Mars appears to leave the room as the door slams, though Imu's spirit still lingers through the flames. It seems as his lands can be distinguished by the thicker bubbles and different font. As for the other man, instead, as we had assumed, he is indeed a god knight and indeed a man mayor, his name being Saint Manmir Guro. Now it's hard to say what Guro is romanized as. Generally, it's usually the katakana for the English word glow or grow, but it could be anything similar that fits that spelling. There is, however, a distinct naming pattern here, as Guro shares its first kana, gu, with Gunko, so it makes sense that father and daughter are both sharing a similar name pattern, but this would also explain why her name was changed from Shuri to Gunko. After all, Shuri was likely meant to her by Candle and Leuven, while Gunko is a name that better matches her biological father's name Guro, even if it carries this sad connotation of literally meaning child soldier. Either way, Guro gives a bit more context as to how Shuri became its celestial dragon, and this is because she was born as one from birth. But rather than Candle being a god knight who had a kingdom with Leuven, he would seem more likely now that Candle literally was just a citizen of the kingdom, and that she was likely forced to bear a child against her will. Now suddenly, the timeline from the last chapter makes a lot more sense. As Brooke explained, a celestial dragon up drifting to Asperia we can now assume to be Guro. Brooke claimed that Candle was so overwhelmed that she ended up bedridden away from the public eye for months, but as some people have suspected, rather than actually being bedridden, it is likely that she went through pregnancy. But we don't get the details due to the sensitivity of the subject. I think we can assume what it is that truly happened while trying to be as tactful as it can. It is likely that after drifting onto that island and spending some brief time there, Guro wasn't raptured by Candle's beauty in much the same way that many others were, similarly to how Don Moulin seemed to be interested with her too. However, while Candle was in love with Leuven, she could not refuse the orders of a celestial dragon. Not while Asperia was part of the government, and thus was forced to bear his child, even if then we have been by accident. Guro even mentions having briefly seen Brooke among Candle's attendants, but Candle always kept him at a distance and didn't allow him to meet with Guro, likely as a way to protect him, as evidently Candle had seen Brooke kind of as her own kid, or like a little brother. Given the dynamic we saw last chapter, the bored and satisfied Guro probably went back to the Holy Land, but Candle was likely left pregnant and retired from public eye to carry out her delivery, not wanting people to know when man had forced her to bear child. However, As Brooke mentioned last chapter, right after Leuven ascended to the throne and married Candle. Well, Shuri was born shortly after. What we can infer from this is that Leuven knew what happened to Candle, and since she was in love with him, Alpha to take her hand and hide Shru's birth as being their kid in order to not distress the people of the kingdom, as after all the two did seem to generally love each other. Even though Shuri was not Leuven's biological kid, he still raised her as his daughter. The same affectionate kid would call her Papa eventually, though the kingdom would find itself without celestial tribute and the government then demand they return Shuri, but Leuven refused to handle his daughter to the Holy Land, thrilling out she would end up having to live like a slave despite her status, which indeed proved to be the case. After all, Amutu particular interest in Gunko, giving her special treatment with perennial youth and a seemingly higher tier contract, also completely controlling her mind to ensure she be obedient. But finally, this chapter we get the reason as to why that is the case. As Gro mentions, Shuri's heterochromia appears to be something more special than just a genetic trait. He of course also possesses this trait, though interestingly he also has the lower eyelashes, but he claims he couldn't awaken it, a term similar to Delfruit awakenings or similar awakenings of sorts. However, he speculates that Shuri might be able to awaken and that the Great One is interested in such an ability. Mu Howard cuts Gro off before he bawls too much about what this ability Trollian, leading us a bit hanging, but it is clear this is the secret behind why Shuri is special. The concept is a bit reminiscent of the Three-Eye Tribe, where it was said that pudding could awaken her. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pie grow naturally. Third eye, allowing her to hear the voice of all things and thus hear panaglyphs. I wonder if this too is a trait to hear the voice of all things though, or if this awakening has more to do with something else entirely. Regardless, Shuri closes the conversation by stabbing Brooke through the skull. She uses Gavabundanavan, one of Brooke's iconic thrust moves, and thus ironically but likely a move that he taught her to begin with. As we speculated last week, it seems this is indeed how Brooke devolved this scar on his forehead, which he retains even as a skeleton, which now, finally after 2 decades, we can finally find out what it is that caused it. Ironically though, even as Brooke recalls his song about how cows and frogs, slaves or kings all end up as bones, he himself is once again denied death. The theme of mortality repeats as he becomes incapable of dying by the sheer miracle of the sword missing most of his vital blood vessels, similarly to how Yarl's survived scouring of his head. Clearly though, recovery was an easy, having taken so long to wake up that he even developed a bead of a beard. The trauma runs deep, and both the brain damage he received and the shock of what happened made Brooke doubt whether what he saw was real or not. Following this period of time, he would decide to leave the past behind and just follow his dream as a pirate, linear him to eventually befriend Laboon and follow a different purpose in life. As we end the beautiful tale of Brooke Peace and return to the present, Brooke begs the Straw Hats as he prostrates to help him liberate Shuri. Although as Chamber of Minds there is no need for formalities among Nakama, still they try to plan how to unfathom the eyes, considering what Loki said, that Ragnar should be the only one who can melt the eyes. As we wrap up the chapter, interestingly, Imo mentions how in the Void Century 2 the Gen race ended up losing due to similar circumstances, as children had been abducted then too. I don't think this necessarily might have massive lore-changing implications, but might simply be a proper explanation as to why those unlast his life, as the desire to protect future generations is an ever-ending human instinct. But while Imo views it as an inevitability of history repeating itself, perhaps it is more fitting to better call it the never-changing kindness of our hearts, regardless the final conflict now finally approaches. As Luffy charges up a big punch coated in haki, and lightning sparks as he finally lands the first proper hit on the grand villain, Imus unleashes a new attack against Luffy and Loki, in which he leaves behind sentient flames akin to homies that move on their own and cannot be easily extinguished, which later serve almost as a homing attack for Imus to use. The attack is named Stigma, which obviously is meant to be the English word stigma. Traditionally, the word stigma commonly refers to a negative association or a mark of disgrace which someone has to carry across their life no matter what they do. Although over time, it's also evolved to take the negative connotation of being an unfair belief associated with a person or group of people based on stereotypes. The name is fitting because Imus's move here is a homing attack, one that no matter how much you try to get rid of it or run away from cannot be dodged. Although Luffy later dodges it by getting rid of its coat, this is just like how stigma works, something that essentially sticks on you and you cannot get rid of. Since quite fitting that Imus's attacks are named after the negative aspects of human behavior, going further back. Though stigma is derived from stigmata from Greek, which means marks and historically refers to the wounds that Jesus Christ bore when he was crucified at the hands and feet, which dies into the heavenly and religious association of gods and devils we get with Imus. Furthermore, the attack is written with the kanji for grudgeful devil blade, with the mention of grudge feeding the concept of stigma sticking around like a grudge, and of course the devil referring to Imus, while the blade represents the sword-like shape the attack takes. The Straw Hats are busy trying to unthaw, but are unable due to what Loki said that only Ragnar can unthaw the eyes he creates. Luckily enough though, Ragnar processly lands on her, allowing the eyes to vanish, and this pen also serves as a very good comparison for Ragnar's size when compared with the Straw Hats. Oda also does a really silly joke of Brook and Frankie being unable to feel the cold of the eyes. Nidu Brook's hand being made of bones and Frankie's hand being made of metal. Imus attempts to attack Luffy further, but as mentioned before, he dodges by tossing his coat, exposing his chest. The falling panels might be confusing if you don't pay attention to the sound effects, but set effects read as don 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 don, the sound of the drums of liberation, which is Oda's coup to show that Luffy is entering year 5th now, for we reach the end of the chapter. We get our setup for the fight between Zoro and Summers and Sanjin, killing them, with the latter expressing desire to defeat killing them, the only way being of course through Conqueror's haki. We finally get better elaboration on the scene between Sanjin and Gabin, where Gabin says Sanjin has the makings of someone who might have Conqueror's haki, but gives us the impression that they have to limit themselves through their doubts and uncertainty. This is quite fitting of Sanjin's character, as he's someone who has always been plagued his whole life by doubt and uncertainty about his true worth as a result of his Charlu trauma, and it took him time as he grew up to understand that he was appreciated and beloved, but to become a conqueror he needs the confidence of one. After all, the full correct translation of how Shuuken no Haki is haki of the color of the conquering king, or color of the supreme king, as the official translates it. Ha means supremacy, conqueror, or generally ambition, which is the same kanji that is used for the word haki. Haki is just a combination of this ha and kai, kai or kai being the Eastern concept of life energy. Thus how is a combination of ha, supreme or conqueror, and king, although we English fans tend to shorten it to just conqueror's haki due to how much of a mouthful it is in English compared to Japanese, but given this name it signifies that one with conquerors must be someone with enough ambition as if to be a king, one to stand above all in terms of ambition. So far we have 28 Conqueror's haki users in the series, though You can easily add to that list Dragon since Evankov compared Luffy's concurs Haki to Dragon in Marine for Green, chapter 570, and likely Jupiter too since all the other Gyurusei were comfort to have it, and it would be weird if he was the only one who didn't. Garling likely might have it too. But that's a whole other level of speculation, so with some thirdish users so far Sanji might join the club as member number 31. The following chapter opens up with a Void Sentry flashback between Joy Boy and Emil showing us the legendary seemingly first encounter between the two. Although it is all depicted as dark coming and hard to understand what's happening, the style of the bubbles and the sound effects makes it sound however like this is a Denden Mushi call if they even used Denden Mushi back then, and as if Joy Boy was trying to call for someone similarly to how Luffy's picked up the distress signal in Punk Hazard perhaps, and Emil replied leading to their first encounter. I'm sure that once we get the Void Sentry flashback this scene will take a much deeper and more emotional significance, but once again it seems to suggest that at least for some period of time Emil and Joyboy may have been unfriendly terms. The interesting thing is that even at this time Emil still retained the mu and nushia pronouns, whereas Joyboy instead chose to have an or pronoun. This is the fairly generic male first-person pronoun that a lot of characters in the series use, but the interesting part is the indices or is written with hiragana rather than with its kanji, essentially being written phonetically rather than written out as proper. The interesting thing is that one of the only other characters to use the pronoun this way is of course Luffy, giving it a more childlike and natural feel to it, given how Joyboy also shares his Vita with the original voice actor for Luffy. It's clear that Ode is trying to build up some parallels between the two for his next move Emu. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Covers his fist in the living flames, allowing it to move freely and extend quite similarly to how Luffy uses his own powers with an expandal, or showing how much this fist extends massively all the way to touching the ground, showing again the sheer versatility of the devil fruit where Emu can match just about anything someone else can do. This homing property, also seen with the stigma, also now applies to the almond, since given how the balms appear to have a will of their own, they are able to hum in on Luffy. Emu shows to be incredibly fast as Luffy tries to hate him, but he instantly moves behind him. Luffy however copies this move, as when Emu tries to skewer him Luffy moves behind him as well. Odada does a great use of paneling to achieve this, where on the first panel Emu is on the right and Luffy attacks on the left. Emu reverses to being behind Luffy and Scorsese moving towards the right, but as Luffy vanishes Emu looks to the left. However, the sound effect comes in from the right as Luffy has effectively circled all around Emu and once again attacks from the right. All of this is done without breaking the cinematic rule of 180, where both characters should remain on corresponding right and left sides of the screen. Luffy showcases a new attack called Gongu Gamono Majin, where he takes the form of a giant gene, or as it also call it, Chinglisha genie. The word Majin is simply the Japanese word for genie at the same time. However, the word can also be used in the context of someone who is superhuman, a person with incredible powers. And so Odada could be doing a wordplay here where Luffy's superpowers also qualify him as a Majin, a superhuman. Funnily enough, within this design, instead of wearing a gemstone on the turban, Luffy has a piece of meat. Emu tries to hurt a Loki, but is protected by Jim, who uses his move Karakasa Gawara Saki. In this move was one of his very first shown moves in Impal Down and translates to Arabesque Tiles Straight Punch, which is a reference to the karate practice of trying to Destroy tiles with your fist with of course his trademark iconic move of Gasan Megawarta Sakin, referring to 5,000 tiles, as if he could smash through 5,000 of them. The group continues to Anthashiri. Anami and Usopp appeared to bring up when Robin and Buffy were frozen, which surprises the other since they weren't there at the moment, of course referring to the scene in Long Ring Long Land when they fought Aokiji for the first time all the way back then. As Amazing Luffy uses a move called Gumigamono Skyry Bullet, a variation of his regular bullet attack, but mixed in with the word Skyry. Skyry literally means there is an opening, and it's a move traditionally used in martial arts to belittle an opponent or pupil that they've carelessly left an opening when dueling, allowing you to strike. Realistically though, it's abused a lot more in anime than it is in real life, and you may have heard a lot of anime characters saying Skyry when anime drops their guard down. Imu attaches a stigma until Luffy's beard, forcing him to stop the transformation. And this seems to give the idea that stigma only really works well on things that catch fire easily, but as Luffy's pursued by more omen bombs, Imu unleashes his blade unlike his other momentary blades, which were omen adaptations from his spear. This one seems to be a genuine, legitimate blade. Imu appears to transform the spear into a little bomb, then passes it through his omen ring to unleash a blade that appears to have a genuine physical form, except its hamon. The jagged black part of the sword is made of omen flames. The sword, a sheep like a rapier, appears to kill all life around it simply by existing, causing all nature on the tree to wither out. The name of the sword is the Boltu, which the year is written in phonetic katakana, as if to appear as the given name of something, as the kanji reading shows us. However, the reading is kyonu, which means nothingness, being comprised by the kanji for void and nothing. If you've been paying attention to your lord, this kanji might perhaps sound familiar, as it was the same kanji used to refer to the second world of the Harley. To recapitulate, in the second world passage it begins with Kyomuni Ibuki Ari, or within the nothingness there be breath. In this case the nothingness can also be equated to something similar like void, but it should be noted, just as explained back then, that void sentry uses a different word in Japanese, being kyuhaku, which literally means something more like empty or white or blank, but we tend to translate that as void instead. Interestingly, this line is followed in the Harley by Morino Camino Maltz Ka La Sita, or the forest god sent forth devils. Originally we interpreted these two lines as breath signifying life re-arising within the destroyed world, and the following line about devils referring to the creation of dalfruits. If we assume dalfruits are regenerate from a tree, then it makes sense that the forest god could have been the entity behind the origin of devil fruits, but we don't know if Imu created the dalfruits or simply attained the ultimate strongest version of it all when someone else created them. What is interesting though is that this could give more context to the previous line, because it's in the meaning of the sword's name, Bafu. We can find the secret to all this. As I mentioned, it is written in phonetic katakana, which gives the idea of sounding like the given name of the blade, but it also makes sense as Bafu is a sound effect much like Nika or Zaza, and generally it indicates the sound of a sigh or an exhale, the breath. But in other words, within the nothingness there be breath. By extension, if Bafu were to be read as a kanji, it generally would mean like storm, as in a great wind, like a great breath, or it could even be pulling around with the chapter title with the sound effect Bohu representing Imu's disappointed sigh, as Luffy cannot match the strength of Joy Boy or even Luffy's own deflated sigh after he loses breath, being stabbed. Furthermore, the katakana for Bafu is the Japanese reading for Bohu. A hibi term that refers to the void state of the earth before God said let there be light. This is quite fitting because once again it embodies that concept which we see in The heart of the world having been ravaged by its previous cataclysm, yet even within that life arises again, embodied in the metaphor of a breath similar to the biblical concept of God giving life to the world when there was none before, but in a sense the blade's name appears to be a reference to the second world of the Harley right around the time that Imus have appeared, and how that led to the creation of the devil fruits, and the rise of the devil as we know it today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.